Hello everyone, my name's Jack, otherwise known as the Avid Assistant, and I'm here in this video to talk about something that seems to keep coming up whenever I'm around post facilities, or if I'm assisting, or I'm just around a place where there's a bunch of people editing on Avid, as well as a lot on the forums and Facebook pages and stuff, which is what version of Avid should I be using? As you can imagine, there's a lot of variables to that question, starting with what do you have a license for? Do you have a current subscription? Do you have an old permanent license? What version of the operating system are you running, whether it's Mac or Windows? You have to have a version of Media Composer that will support that. Are you using any breakout box hardware, like a Blackmagic Ultra Studio box or something like that, where the software for that piece of hardware has to play ball nicely with Media Composer? All of these are different considerations to take into account when you're choosing which version of Media Composer to install on your system. So say if you're doing a remote edit and you haven't installed Avid on your system, so many people will default to just downloading the latest. And while the latest version of Avid will give you access to the most up-to-date feature set, it might not be the best choice for your home setup or for whatever machine setup you're running. So in this video, we will go through all of these different considerations. Everything from how Avid versioning works, which versions tend to be the most stable, something Avid dubs LTM releases or long-term maintenance, meaning they're supported for a long time, as well as which resources to use to check things like OS compatibility or hardware compatibility. Let's dive right in. Right, so first things first, we need to understand Avid's versioning system. So when I first started using Avid Media Composer, it was 2010. I was in my first year of a 3-year film degree, and we were running Avid version 3.5, which released in about 2009. Now, you might be surprised thinking it would be a higher version number than that, since Avid has been running since the late 80s, but in 2003, I believe it was, Avid reset back to version 1 and started again. And this is different to the current versioning system, which is a year and month of release, which seems to be a very popular naming scheme, which lots and lots of software companies have all adopted now, and it makes it sort of easier to track when that particular version came out, and you don't really have to worry about, this is version 147, like hitting an absurd number that sounds weird to say. But at that time, Avid would release a, say, major release, so say like one up from what I was at that time when I started uni, version 4, right? Which would be an entirely new build of Avid, this version 4, adding in a whole bunch of new features and new codes that would enable Avid to do more things. But at the same time, all of this new code and new structure has the potential to introduce a certain amount of instability and incompatibility with systems that haven't been updated yet. So that would be like your 4.0 release. Then over the life cycle of this Avid version 4, it would get updates. So you would have your feature updates to add new things to it, so like 4.1, 4.2, and these might add additional features that or expand upon features that were introduced in, say, version 4. And then you would have your incremental releases or your bug fixes, and this would be like your 4.1.1, like the number after the second dot would be incremental or patch fix releases. And this isn't something unique to Avid. This is how lots of software works, so you may already be familiar with all of this. And each of these major Avid releases would maybe last anywhere between 1 to 3 years. So in actual fact, the Media Composer version 4 that I'm referring to and using for this example came out in September of 2009, so version 5 released in June of 2010. But it would have been supported for a good amount of time after that, since a much more common method for purchasing Media Composer back then would have been to either buy it as physical discs or purchase it through Avid and download, and you'd be buying that version. So your license would be tied to that specific version of Avid. So say you've purchased version 4, you might keep that for, say, 3, 4, 5 years before buying the next current version of Avid at that time when you decide to upgrade. And through that time, so say around for 5 years or so, that version might get continual patch support and fixes and updates and that kind of thing.
Before the dark times. Before subscriptions.
Now, this versioning system lasted all the way through to, I think, version 8 was the last one to use this versioning system, and that had a really long life cycle. Version 8 was released in May of 2014 and lasted all the way through until January of 2018, when Avid moved to the new versioning system of the month and the year, which is when 2018.1 was released. And code-wise and build-wise and a lot of other things, 2018 was very much a continuation. It was the next major release of Avid, just moving to this new kind of naming scheme and, new features and different things coming in. However, it was the last one of what many as Avid editors referred to as the old Avid or classic Avid. Since in 2019, Avid got its big UI update and engine update. And encoding update. Lots of changes came to Media Composer at that time, as well as some issues and things that had to be overcome, like the titling tool and working out Silicon native support and things like that for Apple systems. However, getting back to understanding versioning, now that we are in this year and month naming scheme, it can seem quite different since there is new releases more frequently than there used to be in the version 6, version 7, version 8 days, and we now live in the subscription model of payment. Now, what this subscription model has done in sort of the mindset of people buying this software, and not just Avid, for lots of software, is that they're not particularly tied to any one version. You will subscribe to a piece of software, and then you'll just continually update as new versions are released. And so the version that you use is much more fluid. You just continually kind of update and stay current as things are released. Now, this works great for certain pieces of software that you might use, say for like Microsoft Office or something like that. However, for Avid Media Composer, not so much. You do still want to be using the right version for you, especially since a lot of those principles of the big main release introducing new features that could introduce instability and all your incremental patches slowly getting more stable do still apply. So ever since 2018, we've now had our new Avid build come out each year. At some point in the year, you will have the first named version for that year. So say for currently we are in 2025, and the first 2025 version of Avid was 2025.6, and we're currently in September. It's still the only version of Avid for that year, and this is what's known as the 2025 build. So there will be changes that get improved upon throughout that year and stacked upon. And so you can sort of see this as like the next major release. So like going from version 6 to version 7, version 8 is now going to each year. And this is reflected quite well in the fact that Avid 2024.12 didn't actually come out in December of 2024. It came out in March of 2025. That version wasn't finished until then. And that was the last version of the 2024 build, the last major revision. And so the first version of a new build, the first version to come out of 2025, so 2025.6, is kind of in a way like your, like in the version 6, version 7, version 8 days, it's like your 6.0. That's your first release of this new Avid, where new features will be introduced. It is a new build of Avid. I'm not going to say it's the most unstable, because a lot of the times that isn't the case. 2025.6 has been running great for me, but it has the most potential for instability. Whereas at the opposite end of the scale, your .12 versions of Avid, which is always the last revision of an Avid build before they move on to the next one, is generally seen as the most stable. And this is also the version that Avid refers to as an LTM release, meaning long-term maintenance. And the reason they call it a long-term maintenance release is that the .12 iteration of a yearly build is the only revision of that build that will get continual support. And what do I mean by that? Well, for starters, we are currently in September 2025, and Avid have just released version 2023.12.6. When, say, 2024.12 came out, which is the most recent LTM release for Avid Media Composer, from the date of release, that will be officially supported by Avid for 5 years as a rough roadmap. Now, the first 2.5 of those years will be continual incremental updates. So there'll be 2024.12, .1, .2, .3. There will be continual releases and updates to do patch fixes to fix bugs and things like that. Over time, you might get to say 2024.12.6 or .8, which will have lots and lots of bug fixes and patches and releases to make this the most stable version of the 2024 build, which generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, makes it the best version to be on. Because, well, we all know as a rule of thumb, you don't really want to be updating your version of Media Composer during a job. It would be fairly safe to say that you could update to an incremental or patch fix of your existing release. So say you've been working on 2024.12.1 on your job, and then they release a bug fix version of 2024.12.2, which I believe they have. You could update to that version during your existing project to fix certain bugs, since that would probably be the primary reason for this incremental update. So if I was prepping for a big job, if I was going to first assist on a feature film, say, and this was planning for a very, very long edit, I was actually talking about a potential job with someone earlier today, and this was going to be a 20-month edit, then I would probably vie for a current .12 release, ideally the most up-to-date .12. So I can get the balance of the most features, but also the most bug revisions and stability. So in terms of understanding the Avid side of things and versioning and which one is the best or most stable to be on, that's how all that works, and that's where you'd find your LTMs or your long-term maintenance releases. So that's point number one. Point number two is compatibility with your operating system. And this is a really big point to make. So both Apple and Microsoft regularly update their operating systems. Apple more often than Microsoft, and Apple tends to introduce more problems than Microsoft does in this regard. However, this has been an issue with Windows as well. On the day of release of these updates, Avid might not officially support them. Avid might still be doing testing of their current version, various versions of Media Composer, to see if they will work with this new version of Windows or this new version of macOS. And it's definitely something that I would always advise, staying on an officially supported version of your OS by Avid if you're wanting to run this machine as an edit station. So that means that if you're going to be doing a lot of edits at home and running Avid locally on your system, I would 100% advise turning off auto update. So I don't have a Windows machine available to me at the moment, but as far as the Mac side goes, here's how to do that in your Mac system. Simply come up to the little Apple icon, the top left corner of your screen, and go to System Settings. Then under General, click on Software Update. And you'll see in this area, this little section here called Automatic Updates. Just click the little I at the end here, and then untick Install macOS Updates. I also do the same thing for application updates from the App Store, since I like to wait a little while after each new release to make sure that it's not going to cause any issues before I'll install them, and I'll do that on a case-by-case basis as well. I'll allow it to download, just not install. And so because I run Avid on my home system and I do a lot of projects using Avid here, I'll always wait to update my macOS until Avid officially supports that version, generally speaking. Some exceptions. Now, some of you might be asking, how do I know if Avid Media Composer supports my version of the operating system? Well, good question. Let me show you a couple of resources to check this. So after you've went and checked which version of your operating system you're running, on a Mac, this can be done very easily just by hitting About This Mac. And then down here under macOS, you'll get a description of what version of macOS you are running. You can do the same thing on Windows with About This PC. And once you know which version of your operating system you're running, there are two websites to check Avid compatibility. The first is Avid's own documentation and version matrix. So this is a very text-based page which will list the current builds supported by Avid, broken down by the build, so the year, so 2023, 2024, 2025. And it will show the latest versions of operating systems that each supports. And so this is, of course, always going to be the most official, up-to-date resource for checking this, since it is official from Avid. However, there is a website made by the incredible Chris Bove, which documents this in a much easier to read fashion and breaks it down based on macOS or Windows or Avid version. You can search by whichever criteria works best for you. So if you head to alwaysediting.com, you'll find Chris's website. And then up in the top right here, there is Avid versions. And in this drop down menu, we can see MC qualified for macOS, MC qualified for Windows OS, or just directly search MC versions going all the way back to 2018. So I'm going to click macOS since that's what I'm predominantly looking into. And then we'll get a breakdown based on every yearly iteration of macOS. And it'll tell us which versions of Avid support it and as of when. So this is an extremely useful and clear way to get this information, and particularly helpful with Apple since Apple does a major new release of their OS on an annual basis. So I tend to always stay at least 1 year behind, ideally. Again, with some exceptions, there are some times when I do have to update a little bit sooner than Avid, and then I'll do some testing, maybe dual partitions, and just make sure Avid will play ball first. Generally speaking, I like to stay one version behind to maintain Avid compatibility. And of course, we can, as mentioned, we can also check this in the Windows side too, getting a breakdown of various versions of Windows and which versions of Avid support it. So there's how you would go about checking compatibility with your operating system. But what about compatibility with your hardware? Now, this one can be a little bit more tricky, to be perfectly honest with you, since you do want a particular version of, like if it's Blackmagic, it's desktop video, to play well with Media Composer. And I'd say it's definitely more of an issue if you need a specific version of Avid, like an older version of Avid. So say you're joining a project and you're going to be working with local media at home, and this project so far has been using 2023.12. And so you're going to install 2023.12, and you need to know which version of desktop video will play nicely with that. So a good first step would be to check the support website of the manufacturer of your piece of hardware. So for Blackmagic here, I've went onto their website, hit support, and then under product family, I've hit capture and playback, which is where we'll find a desktop video, the software that we need to run our hardware. And then if we click read more on the latest iteration of desktop video, we'll get all the support information. So I can see here, macOS specific, it supports macOS Sequoia, which is the very latest, and the earliest it supports is Sonoma, so only the most recent two. Both Apple Silicon and Intel based, and a minimum of 8 gig system memory. Then if we scroll down to the bottom here under third-party software support, we can find Avid Media Composer 2024. Interestingly enough, no mention of Media Composer 2025, since this is a brand new version of desktop video and Avid 2025 has been out for a few months, but that's what we have to work with from the official manufacturer. However, in terms of scoping out official support for stuff like this, I tend to ask my community of editors, to be perfectly honest with you. Now, I tend to find if I'm on the latest version of Avid, your best bet is to jump to the latest version of the software for your hardware. However, if you're installing a specific version, it does pay to ask support. So in the Avid editors of Facebook, or Avid users of Facebook group, or on the forums, or on any kind of official users and members page and forum, to ask there, hey, I'm going to be using this version of Avid, and I like to use my Blackmagic Ultra Studio Mini monitor. What's the best version of desktop video? Or if using an Asia card or another manufacturer's card, what's the best software that pairs nicely with this Avid version? And someone should get back to you with a suggestion there. So that's their consideration of hardware in terms of playing nicely of compatibility. But the last thing that I have to circle back to here, which is probably the most common reason to update as well, is feature set. Because you want to balance everything we've already talked about of stability and compatibility with getting new fancy features that you can play with. So where can you go to find out, so where can you go to get a breakdown of all the features of the various Avid versions? Well, as it happens, I just so happen to have made a document to track all this. So I call this my Avid Media Composer feature tracker, and I have all of the versions of release beginning from 2019.6, because it was after the redesign that I started tracking this. They're all on a tab on the left, and you can click on any of these versions and it will jump straight to details of the features that were released in that particular version. And there is also a link at the very bottom of all these tabs here with links to all of my videos covering in detail each new Avid release, beginning with version 2022.7. Now there is a video that goes into detail of features that were released before that, but it's sort of covering the span of 2019.6 all the way through to 2024.4, because that was when I started doing these update videos, and so there was one to get us right up to the point where I started, and now I've done one video per release ever since then. But this document should give you an overview of, once you can find your sweet spot for compatibility and which one you should update to, you'll be able to see all the new features that you'll get in that release, as well as the features that you won't be able to access yet that were released in later versions. And lastly, before I wrap up here, I just want to remind everybody to download the latest versions of Media Composer from Avid's website. Download the installers. I never really do updates via Avid Link. I will always run Avid's uninstaller and then install the new version that I'm installing. And then the first thing that I'll do once booting up is to create a new user profile that is built on that particular Avid version. So all of my user profiles will be named my name or Avid Assistant, and then 2024.10, for example, like the name of that particular Avid release. I highly advise you do the same for a much more stable and bug-free experience with Avid Media Composer. And don't worry, you can import your custom keyboard and some things like that from your old user settings. I have previous videos going into best updating practices, as well as a short video on importing your settings from your old user profile into your new one, available for you to check out. So I will leave links below to all of the various resources that I've mentioned throughout the video, as well as links to my videos on updating and porting your user profile over to the new ones. And if you have any questions on any of the above, or if you're still having issues trying to get a version to run on your particular system stably, then just hit me up in the comments and I'll do my very best to help you out. Thank you very much to everybody for watching, especially to my Patreon and YouTube members. It's always greatly, greatly appreciated. And I will see you all very soon in the next video, where I will be taking a deep dive into Avid's AI transcription feature set as it currently stands in version 2025.6. So stay tuned for that. Bye-bye now.